Hello, welcome to our junior church lesson for this week. And last week, we looked and finished the story of Ezra and how Esther. They all begin with these. Esther, and how she was able to help her people be able to be free from the tyranny of a fellow compadre, in a sense. Haman wanted to try to get rid of all the Jewish people because of Mordecai not worshiping him. But now today, we're going to go back now into these prophets who wrote after Israel was taken out of their land and now being brought back to their land after 70 years. We're going back to the book of Ezra. And today we're going to look at what is a revival. The term revival gets passed around quite a bit. It's a term that's used a lot as far as bringing people in to preach. And when they do that, the goal of that is to see people turn their hearts back to God. But really, what does it all really consider and take place? Well, Ezra chapter 7 gives us a little bit of a theory, because in Ezra, we looked at this a few weeks ago, they wanted to rebuild the temple. And people were trying to get them to not do it and trying to stop every single thing that they were trying to do, the people, because they wanted to rebuild their house because it was ransacked and destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians. So they wanted to find a way to get the temple back. So they built it. And here's what Ezra did. After it was completed, after it was finished, Ezra chapter 7 verse 10, Ezra had prepared his heart to seek the law of the Lord and to do it, and to teach in Israel statutes and judgments. Ezra was a gentleman who was the priest. He was the one who was going to be the spiritual leader to try to bring Israel back to God, because Israel had really fallen away from God. That's one of the reasons why they were taken away for 70 years, beside the fact that they didn't do the laws to let the land rest and all that. So Artaxerxes, which was the king of Persia, he basically makes a decree saying, hey, you can go back, you can do these things. Let's get the temple built. Let's get back to some of the old things that you're able to do. So then chapter 8 goes through a whole bunch of things as far as protection and fasting, and Ezra calling out the Levites, the priests, to go. And then you have a couple of different things that happen there in chapter 9. But then Ezra needed to figure out what to do. Ezra needed to figure out exactly what the people needed. So in chapter 10, he prayed. The first step in revival is to pray. Chapter 10, verse 1, when Ezra had prayed, and when he had confessed, weeping and casting himself down before the house of God, there assembled unto him out of Israel a very great congregation of men and women and children, for the people wept very sore. In order to have a revival, the first thing that has to happen is that people have to realize that they need God. When people don't need God, there's no reason why to have a revival. The point would be mute if people don't understand that, hey, I need to come back to God. Why do people go away from God? That's the question that goes on in a lot of people's mind. What causes somebody to do this? To turn their back on God? Well, one thing is that people expect things to be done right then and there. Another thing is that people expect results to happen good for them. That they want to do these things right, but really, it's not exactly what God's will is, and so if it doesn't conform to their will, they don't want to do it. The other thing is why people try to walk away from God is, well, where is he? Where is he when I'm having all these problems here? And so people will be swayed and moved around. And next thing you know, they've walked away from God. So the second thing of revival is not only do people have to understand their need for God, but number two is that they have to understand that they have to come back and acknowledge the reason why. Chapter 10, verse 2 of Ezra, Shechaniah, the son of Jehiel, the sons of Elam, answered and said to Ezra, we have trespassed against our God, and have taken strange wives of the people of the land, and yet now is there hope in Israel concerning this thing. Basically, he's saying, we've made bad choices, and now we need to realize we need to correct those choices. And they were disputing, they were murmuring over this, they were trying to figure out a whole bunch of stuff here. They fasted. But then, the third thing to know about revival is this. Is that not only does there need to be a situation where people need to understand that, hey, they need to come back. Number two, they confess. And number three, they need to actually do the action of going to God and asking God to help them. Ezra chapter 10 and verse 11. Now therefore make confession unto the Lord God of your fathers, and do his pleasure. Third step to revival is allow God to take over again. You know you've done wrong. You know that your walk isn't right with God. You need to confess and get right, is basically in no uncertain terms. The congregation answered and said with a loud voice, as thou hast said, we must, so must we do. And they understood the fact that they needed to have a revival. They needed to cut off the things that were hindering them. Now, in this sense, in this situation here, what was going on is that they had married people that were not helping them follow God. And they needed to figure out, well, do we either see if they'll trust God or whether we need to separate from them. But the thing is that they had to realize that they were doing wrong and they were not following God's will. And so revival comes when people understand that, hey, I've done wrong. And because of that, I need to confess that. I need to change what I've done wrong. And I need to commit myself again back to God. But why do we have revival meetings every year? Why do we have it twice a year? Well, serving God, people tend to get discouraged. People tend to get depressed. Or it's a different group of people who are not necessarily doing the things that they ought to do. But don't revival meetings work? Absolutely they do. It may affect just one person. But you know what? One person is better than none. And you never know what can happen when that one person turns their heart back to God again. And that's what Ezra is teaching us. And we're going to look at that a little bit more so in Nehemiah. How Ezra had preached to the people, and the people really understood more so. But what I want us to understand here today is this, is that Israel needed a revival. They needed someone to tell them basically what they're doing is wrong, and they need to fix it. And sometimes it's not easy to admit when we've done something wrong and whether we need to fix it or not. But once we do that, then we can grow and do our walk with God much better than we can even imagine. Next week we'll be looking at Nehemiah, how he rebuilds the protection for the nation of Israel. He was responsible for the wall. Ezra was responsible for helping the temple be rebuilt. All these things happening because of the fact that they went away from God. But now they're trying to get right again. And they're trying to get themselves back in right relationship with God.